Hey guys, Mike here with Morrison's Outdoor Adventures. We are going to kick off our new YouTube series talking about recovery. So we're going to break these videos out into short segments and we're going to cover a whole host of different topics. Starting off today, what we are going to cover is first off different types of recovery. Basically we can break recovery down into three main types and they fit into two categories. The two categories that we're looking at is what we call kinetic recoveries and static recoveries. So static recoveries is where we're not using any momentum, no vehicle-to-vehicle extraction. We're also not using stretch style gear like kinetic straps and kinetic ropes. Static recoveries, things like winching, high lift jack, or just towing, those are typically processes where we're not using any type of stretchy gear. We're also not using any type of momentum to do those. The three types of recovery are, first, winching. So we believe that winching is the safest method of recovery because it is static and it's very controlled. The second method that we'll talk about is high lift jack, and it also is a static style recovery. And if you're using the official high lift jack, right, not a farm jack or a different other off brand, and you're using it correctly, the high lift jack is a great tool and it is very safe when used correctly. The third type is what we call a traction extraction. So traction extractions like towing or kinetic recoveries, right, hence the name, can be both static or kinetic. So we can use gear that has no stretch. We can also use gear that has stretch and momentum to extract a vehicle. These are the most dangerous styles of recovery because once those vehicles and things go into motion, we can't control that kinetic energy. We can also put extreme forces into action, and once they are in movement, we cannot control them. So that's kind of a breakdown of the two basic kind of categories that recoveries fall in and the different types of recovery that we're going to talk about. But first we want to talk about gear. You got to have the right gear and the right tools in order to perform these recoveries. And there are a ton of options out there. I'm not really going to get into brands per se, but I am going to give you some ideas on what to look for as far as what gear looks good. If I give you the tools, then it doesn't matter the brand. You can go take a look at gear and you can decide for yourself. So we're going to kind of look at a whole host of different gear today. The ratings on it, I'm not going to get in because that's going to be a separate video talking about, you know, tree straps and kinetic straps and stuff like that. What I want to focus on today is how to identify ratings, because there's a lot of different stuff out there, and understanding those ratings when you're reading those tags and things like that. So we're going to shift over and we're going to look at some of that in just a minute. But most important thing with any of your recovery gear is that it needs to have a rating on it. If it does not have a rating on it, then we're looking at something that potentially was never proof tested or pull tested, so we don't necessarily know what those capacities are. We're also going to talk about some different terms and stuff today and hopefully clarify those a little bit. The first term that we're going to talk about is minimum brake strength, or MBS. This is probably one of the more common ones. It also kind of coincides with minimum tensile strength, or MTS. That's one of the main ones that we're looking for on our recovery equipment. What we're trying to stay away from is when there's terms out there like ABS, or average brake strength, or maximum brake strength. What the braking strength is when they pull test these, when they're going through the pull testing process and creating the gear for those companies that do pull testing, minimum brake strength is, say they pull test 10 of them, they're going to take the lowest number that those things broke at, including minimum tensile strength. So they take the lowest number that broke at in the pull testing. Average brake strength, and one of the reasons we want to stay away from it is out of those 10 that they pull tested, they took all the different numbers, they added them together, and they divided by 10 to get an average number of what they broke at. It doesn't really help us because we need to know the lowest number that equipment broke at. Maximum brake strength, which unfortunately sometimes can be confused with minimum brake strength because of MBS. What they did is they pull tested their 10 or however many they pull tested, and they chose the highest number. Some manufacturers unfortunately do this so that they can make their gear look much stronger than it really is. Again, we want to know that minimum number, that minimum brake strength or minimum tensile strength. So that's what we're going to look at, is kind of identifying those. Some other things that you might see on your gear is SWL or WLL. SWL is safe working load limit, or WLL is working load limit. This a lot of times comes from the overhead lifting industry, or industries that have to follow OSHA guidelines or different types of rigging guidelines, because what they do is they take that minimum brake strength, especially in overhead lifting, and they divide that by a safety factor, or some will call it a design factor. For instance, a lot of times in the overhead lifting industry, that design factor or safety factor is going to be 6. So, you know, if you have a product that has X minimum braking strength, they divide it by 6, and that gives them a working load limit, or a safe working load limit. This allows them to have a little bit of cushion to work within a safe range. It also allows some of the external forces that could play into their rigging, like gravity or angles and stuff like that, to have a little bit of cushion in that area. So it's just a little bit of extra safety. So a lot of our gear, excuse me, is not going to have working load limit on it, or safe working load limit. Some of the gear that we pull directly from the overhead lifting industry or the towing industry will have that, but we'll kind of clarify that as we start looking at tags. 110% by no means is this a complete guide, right? We're just kind of hitting the treetops when we're looking at different ratings and stuff on our gear. So let's go ahead and hop into it, and we'll talk about that. Alright guys, so right here we have a tag that is on a strap. So this is a typical tag that you're going to see on an eye-to-eye sling from the rigging industry, and we see this a lot of times in the off-road world with our tree saver straps. So this is a Factor 55. When you see on the left hand side there, it says tree saver strap, part number, manufactured date, and it gives you a serial number. On the right hand side, this is what we're really interested in, what we're looking. Alright, our next tag here, this one also comes off of a strap. This is an ARB tree strap, or tree trunk protector, as you can see labeled there. A different type of tag, and this one's very common in the off-road world. So again, it tells you the brand, what it is. It even has a batch number there at the top. Tells you the material. This one has the ISO certification there. And there we go, looking at that minimum brake strength right there, right? So we're seeing that minimum brake strength. That's what we're looking for. The next number, 26,500 pounds of minimum brake strength. So big difference in the straps, right? But that's because of the plies of the strap, or how many plies are in the assembly of the webbing. So we'll get into that later when we start talking about the straps. The other good thing, it tells you the length of the strap, read all safety labels, and the Factor 55 one has that as well, but on the back here, it does give you some information as far as how to care for these. You can see these are well used, but one of the most important ones down here that it's going to say is on this one, okay, if you can see that, says be aware that a strap can lose up to 20% strength when wet, but it does give you general care and maintenance. So just understanding that these capacities are not absolute. They can change with different characteristics and things like that. Alright guys, so we've got a soft shackle here. This is a Factor 55 soft shackle. This is where we start to see some difference in how things are rated, and it starts to become really important, right? Remember that not all soft shackles are created equal. So this particular one right here, we're seeing WLL, remember that working load limit of 8,700 pounds. Then below that we see MBS, that is that minimum brake strength, that 43,500 pounds. So that's really ultimately what we're looking for. Again, those two terms, working load limit or minimum brake strength. And that's what we're shooting for kind of in this realm. Stay away again, because you'll see this a lot with soft shackles, that average brake strength or maximum brake strength. And companies like ARB and similar companies like Factor 55, they will actually send you their pull test data, or share that data with you so that you know that you are getting a quality product. So right here is another soft shackle. This one is from ARB, right? So we're seeing here it says braking strength, right? Which is very similar to minimum brake strength. Sometimes you'll see it called braking strength, but it's rated at 14.5 T braking strength. So the T stands for tons, 2,000 pounds in a ton, right? And it also gives you a batch number there. These, though, a lot of times tend to get worn off, so you do have to be careful with that. Again, a lot of times once that rating is worn off of there, a lot of times I'll discontinue use, just because if somebody else grabs it, they may not know what that rating is. The other cool thing about like this Factor 55 one here is it does show you the correct rigging for a soft shackle. Same thing with like the Safe Extract brand. Theirs is going to look very similar to this, and it's going to show you the proper rigging right there on the tag. Alright, next piece of kit we got here. This is our screw pin bow shackles, or a lot of you call them D-rings. So we see that WLL stamped on the side for 0.75, and then the T, that's 4.75 tons. Again, 2,000 pounds in a ton. So this is where a lot of people tend to get confused, right? They look at that number and they're like, that number's not that high. But again, remember, that's the working load limit. That is not the minimum brake strength. Because like this particular one, which is a Van Beast, it comes from an overhead lifting company. We're seeing that they use the industry standard of a 6 safety factor or design factor. So their braking strength, minimum braking strength, is well over 60 some odd thousand pounds. One thing I do want to point out with this, and we'll talk more about it in the future, is notice that these are not raised. They are stamped into it. I tend to gravitate towards my ratings on metal being stamped into it rather than raised, because it will not hurt the straps, and it's typically, not always, but typically indicative of a good quality piece of product when it's stamped in, versus, and I'll show you this particular one right here where it is raised lettering. So a lot of times over time, if you're doing a lot of recoveries, or like in the overhead lifting industry, this raised lettering will wear your straps out as they kind of move back and forth on this. So I tend to stay away from the raised stuff, because again, it can cause wear and tear on your straps or other things that you put on there. You can also see, you know, kind of the casting here where it went together versus the casting on these, right? There is no seam or anything like that. Everything's stamped into it. Even have the size stamped into it and their serial number or batch number. So again, that's kind of why I tend to gravitate towards overhead lifting companies for my gear. Not a huge cost difference either. Alright, the next piece of kit that we're seeing here, so we see 5/16 inch. So that's typically the size of some things like chain and stuff like that. So this tag is on what we call a transit cluster, but could be very similar to what we'd see on a chain or something like that. Right next to the size, the 5/16 of an inch, we see grade 70. So that is where the capacity comes from. Grade 70 is transport grade chain. Typically that's what you're going to see in the on truckers hauling loads and stuff like that. So they do have lower grades, but typically we recommend a minimum of grade 70 if you're going to be using it for recovery. So they figure that out. So the grade 70 and the size of the chain is how they rate their stuff. So for instance, a 3/8 grade 70 would be rated higher than a 5/16 grade 70. And then they have higher grade 80, grade 100, and then grade 120 or 130. But typically grade 70 is sufficient in what we do. The working load limit down there, the WLL 4,700 pounds. Again, they take that minimum brake strength of how this is rated and they divide it by a safety factor to get that minimum brake strength. So I'll see if I can share a link in the YouTube videos if you want some more information on chain ratings and such. But typically, this particular transit cluster is something that I use a lot of times for securing to things like Subarus and crossover style vehicles, typically not in really heavy recoveries with big heavy overland style rigs. Normally for something like that I would go up to a 3/8 grade 70. That's going to be rated a little bit higher than what this is. So, but that's the type of rating on chains. Normally it will be stamped into the links and the hooks that are on the chain, right? So it's not going to necessarily have a tag like this, but if it's grade 70, it's going to have this gold coloring to it. So that's because they want DOT officials and things like that to be able to identify it very quickly on the side of a truck. They don't want to have to be looking for those ratings and stuff like this. This particular transit cluster came from Max. So I know that it's a good quality product, but B&A Products does make a lot of towing and gear like that. Alright guys, so the next piece of kit that we're going to talk about here, pulley blocks. So again, this is an ARB and we see the rating at 20,000 pounds there. So they did not add in a minimum brake strength, unfortunately, which is something again that we're looking for. I do happen to know that this is the minimum brake strength of this particular one, but you have to kind of go through their literature in order to find that information. Sometimes, right, you are going to run into situations where you're just going to see a rating like this. You may have to do a little bit of research. Some other brands out there like Safe Extract, you know, they definitely stamp in a good quality minimum brake strength rating right on their pulley blocks, and it's very, very easy to see. Another one that we got here, so this particular one, I'm not sure of this brand, I use it for an example, but you can see here that they do have a rating, but you have to open it up to see it, and it's working load limit, and it's hard to make out because of the powder coating. It's a 12.5 in a T, so that's 12.5 tons, again 2,000 pounds in a ton. Same thing, it shows it on that side, but again, you can't really see it. And this is also where we start running into issues because we don't know what their design factor or safety factor was. They don't necessarily readily release that information, so it could be a one-to-one safety factor. So that's some of the stuff that we want to keep in mind when we're choosing good quality product. So again, the ARB right here at 20,000 pounds minimum brake strength, right? So that's quite a bit versus this one. And again, it's hard to see there, but it's a working load limit of 12.5 tons. So you can see it a little bit better there maybe. But again, it's hard to read and most people are going to miss that. But we don't necessarily know what their safety factor or their design factor is when they make that. There's no real industry standard that they follow in order to get that number. Alright, kind of a cool piece of kit here, the X-Lock from Safe Extract. If you've been in my classes or if you've watched our trailer rollover recovery demonstration, you've seen me use this. Very versatile tool. You can use it for belaying heavy things like vehicles down hills or riding a trailer, but you can also use it to shorten winch line, among many, many other things. So right here, see if I can get it to focus on it, we see 20,000 pound working load limit. So Safe Extract does follow industry standard in their ratings and things like that. So it is good quality equipment, but again, we're looking good rating with that working load limit right there. And we see 20,000 pound. It's definitely well within the capacity for the type of stuff that we're doing and the types of vehicles we're working with. The next piece of kit that I'm going to show here, and this is when we start getting into some different things. This is a Factor 55 load distribution plate. So I'll zoom out and show that a little bit, show you both sides. But these don't necessarily have a minimum brake strength. A lot of times very similar to like our hitch receivers and stuff like that. what we're going to see is a max load of 20,000 pounds, meaning you should not load this over 20,000 pounds. And with this particular piece of kit, because we could be hooking up multiple pull points to it, we could easily reach that number. But that's when we're starting to see getting outside of that minimum brake strength and stuff like that. If this was not a Factor 55 piece of kit, kind of just knowing how well they go through testing procedures and stuff like that, I would not use this. But knowing Factor 55 and how they do their testing, which is well known throughout the industry, right? Then we know that max load 20,000 pounds, we can safely use this up to 20,000 pounds. You can kind of see this one's seen some use on it, right? But it is stamped on both sides with that max load of 20,000 pounds. Alright guys, thanks for joining in and spending some time with us here on YouTube, and hopefully this sheds some light on what some of these terms and stuff mean on your recovery equipment, or helps you make a good decision when you're purchasing your kit and putting your kit together. I definitely will say that this is not a full every little piece of information. We're only hitting the treetops in a short period of time, right? We want to keep these videos short. I do recommend going out and searching out a International Four-Wheel Drive Trainers Association certified trainer to teach you recovery, right? Recovery is dangerous, and we want to make sure we're doing it correctly. So make sure that you do that. Also, check back in the future. We have more videos coming out where we're going to start breaking down each piece of gear. So our next one will be talking about tree straps and how to choose the right tree strap for your recovery kit. And then we'll move on and start looking at different pieces of gear. We're going to try to keep it kind of set to one piece of gear per video so we can spend enough time on it, and we'll talk about some basic rigging with that particular piece of kit too. Make sure that you like, subscribe to us, and share. Help us get the word out. Every little bit helps as far as helping us continue to make these videos. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you on the trails.